Morning, everyone. The picture here is a lovely mountainscape picture that I took on a cross-country skiing and mountaineering trip last winter. And I put it at the beginning of the presentation because I thought it was germane for the world that we live in right now. You know, you see in the middle a very dynamic, interesting moving cloud, very central to the picture. What you also see is a bloody hard rocky mountain. Right, and I think that's the real reality that we all find ourselves in is well, the cloud has a lot of possibilities, and I will talk a lot about it as we go forward in this presentation, but there's a whole chunk of our business that's going to move a little bit more slowly in the cloud. So as we go charging into that cloud full bore and looking for all its benefits, it's good to remember there's that mountain in the side. The presentation today, we could have gone one or two ways, and what I decided when you're looking at a change within your business, an investment decision, or moving forward with new technology within your business, there's really two groups of things you need to think about. One are pulls or attractors. What are you going for? What's bringing you there? And I think that's probably best viewed by actually touching the technology. So I encourage you, in the ample time given today, to go back to the Mitel booth and have a really good hands-on look on our collaborative apps and interaction of mobile devices and solutions. But the other part of the equation are the pulls, the things that are holding us back or barriers that slow us down from adopting technology, and they come in a wide range of things, and I thought I'd spend our time today going through those. So I know there's a variety of people in the room, some Mitel customers, some not, so I thought I would start off with a little bit of a background in terms of Mitel's architecture and philosophy, and then lead that into a more broad discussion of what's going on in the broad IT space. Because increasingly, you can't look at UC, or you can't look at video, or you can't look at mobility as separate items. The spaces are moving together, so the pressures and the decision-making frameworks that you make around a whole series of your applications are coming together. So this freedom architecture is something we came up with about a decade ago. And it's lasted well. We're using it still today, and I suspect we'll use it going forward. And I think it's lasted well because when we went about this, we approached looking at the Mitel value in the context of broad IT. So the foundation is, on the first part, is the end user will choose their device. You hear a lot of discussion about end users bringing their own device, and that's one mode of choosing. But I think it's more important it's the end user chooses the device. So the BlackBerry, which sometimes I'm now embarrassed to bring out of my pocket, that I use is my choice. Whether Mitel pays for it or I pay for it is a secondary consideration. But I think the key part for us was the choice of device or devices is fundamentally about how I want to interact with the network. The next piece is an infrastructure or the network in between. While it has to be engineered very careful and be well done, and getting advice from companies like Britannic who understand the applications and the network was well advised. It's not related directly. You don't need to buy the device from the same company that sells you your infrastructure or the same company that sells you your applications. And the third and final tenet of this is that UC is an application like any others. While traditionally PBXs were a very special thing in the corner, treated very differently with their own access and their own devices and their own software and their own ecosystem of software providers, we clearly have shown that that's no longer true. We're the first company to virtualize, and we've been hugely successful with that virtualization moving forward and treating voice as an application, as an application like any other. And I think what came out of that was a real piece of learning for us around the power of framework. And so I want to take you through a little story or a walkthrough of our decision-making process around moving towards virtualization. What was our thinking behind it, and why has it been so successful? But what I'd like to start off first is with a thing that I call the CIO Squeeze. And this could be the IT director squeeze. It could be the IT manager squeeze. One of the benefits of my job, I get to travel quite a bit and meet a lot with folks like you in this room and talk to them about their business decision-making processes and what do they see more broadly in IT and what other businesses are trying to accomplish. And what bubbled up is what I call the CIO squeeze. And what we've seen since the invention of IT is the waterfront continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And what I mean by that is the applications that we're expected to support and interact with get bigger each year. We expect to support mobile devices and Twitter and social networking and a whole series of different applications. But at the same time, we're talking about fax and voicemail, right? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But since the year 2000, investment as a fraction of revenue, IT investment, has dropped. Year 2000 was the peak, and it's been dropping ever since. So we're asked to do more with less. So the net result is you get large communities within a company who are underserved by the current model. So this is obviously not a marketing pitch for starting a career in IT, but it gets worse than this, actually. So the other thing we've had over the last while is a real inversion of IT. It used to be that you went to your office, your place of work, to get your best network, to get the coolest apps and get the best devices. But now, for a whole series of classes of devices and applications, you have better applications at home. In fact, often in case, you have better network access at home. So not only do you have an underserved community, you have a bunch of people that know they're underserved. They know there's a different model, and they know that IT could be better. So what does this mean? What's happening? What you're getting is employees with the best intention in the world taking matters into their own hands. They're trying to use consumer devices and applications to serve business problems, and are. How many folks in this room, I won't ask you actually to put your hands up because it's embarrassing, use Dropbox? All right, I used to ask this question. And then you'd ask the second question, which would be, how many of you have checked the security policies behind that? Most people, including myself, have not. Right? And the reason people use Dropbox is because they know it, and it's productive, and they're underserved. You're also getting companies repackaging consumer-based services and offering them in a business framework. So Google Docs is a classic example of this. Google Docs, if you look at the applications inside Google Docs, Gmail, and all the various applications inside the Google Docs portfolio, they're identical, absolutely identical to the ones you can have for free. The only difference is they've changed them. They've changed the support model, so they have some. Right? There is a number you can call if something goes wrong. They've added security features, and they've changed their policy about crawling. They don't crawl through your information for doing no harm, do no evil, as Google says. So they respect essentially the data requirements of the business. Why would a company move to Google? Well, Mitel went to Google. Why did we go to Google? Is we saw email as a commodity application. Very, very important to the company. It's a utility, absolutely required. We need to have email that's up and running. But we're not going to be a better company than Avaya or Cisco or any one of our other competitors by their choice of email. It's utility like electricity or water. But these point solutions themselves are not sustainable. So what we think is happening is a more fundamental change in IT in terms of the way IT is going to be delivered going forward. So bifurcation of IT services is a split, essentially, of the way IT services delivered. The traditional model, which is the potpourri model, was essentially decisions on buying various IT apps were made on an individual app-by-app basis. Your decision of buying a PBX was quite separate from your decision of buying your ERP or your CRM or whatever, a desktop automation. Sure, they might have used the same end-user devices in terms of PCs and networks, and sure, there might have been screen pops and a few light integrations, but they were fundamentally separate decisions. They were typically bought from different vendors. They were supported by different people in the organization, and they had very unique ways of doing business. I think what we're going to see going forward is two things are going to happen because of the squeeze. One are companies are going to break their application purchases into two kinds of categories. Differentiated services, and these are services which make your company more competitive than one of your competitors. They add to the value of your company as opposed to utility services like the Google email example I gave, which are important services for running your business. So in our business, very common differentiating services, anything to do with a contact center. Companies' interaction with customers are typically an area where companies see they can differentiate against their competition. And hence, what we'll see companies will make this split. They'll obviously try to increase their investment into differentiated services and reduce their investment, or at least the energy they put into utility services. I think in terms of a few biases, I think the larger companies become or are the more differentiated services they can afford and can justify having within their portfolio. Smaller companies, SMEs, will tend to use more utility services, and I think the smallest of all companies will use complete utility services. They will not have any unique IT capability. They'll take it off the rack, so to speak. I think the services, breaking up the services is only half the problem. The next piece is choosing a framework. So while I said, now you've concentrated your investment, but why, whether you choose a differentiated service or a utility service, you still have to do backups, restore, have disaster recovery plans, upgrade. And the traditional model is every application had its own way of doing it. Increasingly, what we see happening is a series of frameworks emerging that allows you to treat a whole class of applications very similarly. And the one I want to walk through is one that both Mitel and Britannic has had a lot of success with, is VMware as a framework. So I'm sure most people are somewhat familiar in the room with VMware, but I'll go over a little 101 on VM just to make sure we are all on the same starting point. So VM's original claim to fame was they solved the multi-application user problem. So it used to be the best practice in IT was one app per one server if you had a high availability requirement. I'll use a North American example, the Walmart example. Any guess in the room in a typical Walmart store, sort of like a big Tesco, how many servers would be in a typical Walmart store? Any guess? Let's say 2003. I'll cut it short, 20. 20 servers to run a Walmart store. And the reason why is they did all their IT centrally, and they shipped out on the same trucks that were breaking diapers. They brought computers, and each computer had one application on it. Maybe their terminal, their cash register application, another one for their inventory, and another one for the Microsoft Office for the back office. Now they're down to one because they virtualized the whole piece. And what VMware did is they cracked the code on that, essentially allowing you to run multiple applications separately on top of a server. That you can get for free from any number of sources, including VMware. Why VMware grew $1 billion last year was the brilliance of they took that layer, that isolation layer that allowed you to have separate applications running in separate containers, and they applied it across a whole data center. And then they built a whole series of tools, some of which I've listed here, that gave huge productivity gains for running data centers. 2 to 3 times third-party external documented benefits for using VMware over traditional data center management. So they got built in as best practice into data centers all around the world. 85% of enterprises on the planet use VMware. So when we looked at VMware not as a way of saving a little bit of computing power that you require to run your voice processing and your UC. We saw VMware as a de facto best practice in terms of running software applications. So when we supported it, we did 2 things that's very clear in terms of us looking at it as a framework as opposed to a tick box piece of marketing, was we supported across every one of our tools, and we supported every one of their tools. Because what the value VMware brought to their customer base on virtualization was that rich set of tools. The outcome of that has been some pretty spectacular growth. Now 40% of our shipments outside the factory door go out VMware. You can see the numbers there. It's growing very, very quickly. Partners like Britannic, who've embraced VMware aggressively and built it into a whole range and continuum of solutions from on-premise all the way up to private and public cloud, are growing 2.5 times faster than the industry average over the last 3 years. 2.5 times. And this is a period of time where IT money is tight. We just went through that big squeeze. You guys are not giving up money easily. There's very, very clear, there's high value in terms of using VMware as a framework. It takes away a huge number of the barriers of going forward. It also gives some really interesting steps to move forward into that cloud. So VMware is the de facto leader in the private cloud. If you're running cloud in your data center, most likely you're running VMware. And what they have done and continue to do is to take that piece of leadership and drive it into the cloud. By no means they're going to own the public cloud, but I think you already have some very significant players and companies like Google and Amazon and Salesforce.com. But a good number of applications, ours being one of them, will transfer back and forth seamlessly to the cloud. So our view in terms of our software, both technically and commercially, are lined up that it's optimized around software. So if you buy your software running on a black box that says Mitel, and then you move it into a virtualized or standard server, and then you move it into the cloud, you can do it, and it's the same software. It's the same code. There is absolutely no changes for the end user. And probably just as important for you guys commercially is you don't rebuy the licenses. The license is a license is a license. It moves across all of them. And VMware provides a very nice transition path technically to make that happen. So I spent quite a bit of time talking about one framework. And if you remember on that chart, the bifurcation chart, I said, well, there's several. Although there are many. And I would like to pick out on a couple. I mean, we talked a lot about mobile devices as endpoints on the bottom line, but they're also a framework in their own right. So it's a very powerful ecosystem. If you look at the reason why BlackBerry's got themselves into trouble compared to Android and iOS is really the ecosystem that's driving those consumer brands. BlackBerry is not duplicated. And until they figure that out, they're going to have the continuing woes they have right now. It's driven by a consumer power curve and has some mature infrastructure underneath. So they have some really neat ways, stores to deliver technology. If you go to the back of the room, you'll see a whole series of our applications that run in any of those devices, and it's an example of leveraging that framework. We can develop really quickly in these environments, but I think there were some really ahas for us in going through this journey. So for Mitel, when we came into this first, we said, you know what, we want one application to run across all these devices and look the same. It makes sense for one company. The reality is people choose to use one of these devices, not all of them. Right? We all make different choices. And what's more important to them is not that the device looks like a Mitel application on that device. That an app for an iPad should feel like an iPad app. And an Android should feel like an Android app. And while they may have similar content, they have a different zen or feel to them. And so what we ended up doing was scrapping that idea of having a single client. And we actually have, while they're related development teams, we have separate developers for each of the platforms. And we actually release them asynchronously. So, the Apple one is going at the Apple pace, and the Android one is going at the Android pace. And while they deliver similar functionality, they have a very different kind of feel. And we've had huge pull in terms of that change. And that's really understanding that the mobile device is a framework in its own right. The other piece, and you can see this device at the back of the room, is our UC360 collaboration device. And why I put it in on the mobile power curve train is if you look what this device is built on. It's built on an OMAP4 processor. Okay, it's a chip technology that's driving forward on pad technology. The Kindle uses it, and the Galaxy and others. It's an Android operating system. And it's riding that power curve to provide a very different entry point into the video market. I think it gives you so it's riding that whole power curve, so as Amazon sells bucket loads of Kindles, OMAP4 volumes go up and prices come down. Android, with its whole community of applications, allowed us to develop very, very quickly on this. So for instance, you go in, one of the applications you can do on this is you can automatically link back to your PC, your desktop. You can link into Dropbox, funnily enough, and you can link into Google Docs. All those applications were written by other companies than Mitel. They're in the broad Android store. We pulled them in, did all the licensing agreements and so on, and bundled it into the device. So very quickly, we can develop a device with a lot of richness, with a much more shrewd R&D investment strategy in our perspective. Focus on what we're really good at. Again, the model of this device is very much like the Apple model, a very sexy, straightforward user interface to solve a particular business problem with network applications hanging in behind. Yeah? So, traditionally iPod, iTunes, iPad, iStore, and very, very similar model. The particular need where this one fits into is the part where video and collaboration room-based systems have not reached well. The executive office and small meeting room comes in at a price point of around £1,500 for the video option, closer to £1,000 for just collaboration and audio. Does everything with inside. If you don't have Mitel technology, it's 100% SIP-based. You can hang this off any PBX. It's been interop with all of them. So it's solving a particular need, interop with all various room-based systems. And again, a very good data point in terms showing the power of that mobile framework. Yeah? A couple more charts. So another one. Another framework is Google. Talked about it earlier. No, so Google we use as a utility within Mitel. We use it for our email and then a good chunk of our documentation. But Google is the leader in terms of the cloud. I mean, you could argue whether it's them or Amazon, but I think I would have to give the tip to Google. They are the number 4 of not number 3 manufacturers of servers in the world. Well, not a commonly known fact. The only people that buy Google servers is Google. Google makes their own hardware for all their data centers. One of the most recent Google data centers that just opened was built right in the shadow of the Hoover Dam because they could negotiate a different charge and power because the line loss, that thing would suck. So they put it right by the generation facility. Really interesting. So they feel, when you talk to the senior guys at Google, they have an advantage because they can host, they think they can host per whatever you want to measure, per CPU, per storage, cheaper than anybody else. So what they are doing is they're offering the ability to leverage that. They're opening up their tools that were developed in the consumer world, and they have very rich interfaces. So it's a space to watch. I mean, it's interesting to see how much Google will push into the business space. Traditionally, their model has always been based on advertisement. And as much as I've poked them, I can't get a good answer from them of why they're doing enterprise, other than because they can, and it might lead to something. Generally, I think the philosophy of Google is what they do is they create a community, right, which in their language, they create a community, a bunch of people that are connected, and then after the fact, they figure out a way to monetize it, how to make some money in it. So they did it with a search engine. They made, arguably one of the best search engines in the world. And then they came up with a very, very clever way of tying click-through ads to it and guaranteed feedback to marketing people to generate a way of monetizing it. They did a different monetizing model for maps. I suspect they'll do a different monetizing model for around business. I think the $4 a user a month they're charging is not their monetization path. I think it's covering their costs of developing the community. We'll see where it ends up. But you'll see from us, because again, I think they're a black horse and not one to be ignored. You'll see a number of our applications and solutions showing up within Google Frameworks over the next 12 months. So I'd like to wrap up today with a little discussion around the competitive food chain. So one of the things I often hear when I'm talking, especially some of our larger clients, is saying, we really like your technology. You're a great company, but are you going to be here in 5 years from now? And they start listing out a number of the skeletons that are on the beach, and aren't I safer by buying X? And I said, well, think about the market. So the traditional market thinking, in mature markets is they have a thing called the rule of 3. I think it was something done by the Harvard Business School. And the rule of 3 states that you got 2 big, Goliaths pounding each other for the market. You have some noble third fish that's moving around and getting the pieces that they're not. And then they have a whole series of niche players. That's how a market should look. But the market that we're playing with now, if you look in the UC space, because it is a software application, it truly is a software application. And because it's core to communication, which is key to social and a whole series of different solutions, you get all sorts of people involved. So when Avaya bought Nortel's assets for a brief time, they were the largest fish in the sea. They were the biggest player in the UC space. Not true any longer, but who's Avaya most worried? I would contend they're most worried about Cisco. Very similar Cisco model. Cisco's got a lot of breadth, overlaps their space. Certainly, for their large customers, Cisco is certainly is problematic for them. Who's Cisco most worried about? Microsoft. Who's Microsoft most worried about? Google. Who's Google's most worried about? Facebook. Not really looking like a rule of 3, is it? And then you got some fish that are altogether different. They don't seem to be worried about anybody in the likes of Apple. But so fine, that's true. It's not the rule of 3. We're in an undefined space. What can we draw from this? And I'll tell you what I can draw from a Mitel perspective, then I'll suggest what maybe you can draw from it. What I can draw from my space is when I look at this, there are some very, very big players. So in the traditional PBX world, we competed against PBX, manufacturers with pretty similar value propositions and different spins on the ball, and maybe you could fight up 1 or 2% market share. It was hard to grow quickly, but it was hard to get squished like a bug. This looks like, oh boy, you better be worried about getting squished like a bug, right? Or smelt or something, whatever the small fish is. But the other piece is to be really targeted. So saying, you know what, you can't be better than Cisco or Microsoft in everything that they do. You really got to choose your races. And so for us, you're never going to see us make a device. We're never going to, in terms of a mobile device. That market is a consumer-driven market. I know some of our competitors have. You'll never see us do that. We'll make good appliances for the desktop where we can make a difference, and we think 360 is a good example of that. We're going to focus at software, UC software at being our best, and we'll make hardware where it makes a difference, but increasingly, and we're seeing that trend, it's going to go away for us. Right? If you want it, we'll sell it, but really it's just, we're really a UC-focused software company. Be very, very focused. In terms of when we go into new markets like video, we'll choose a spot. We're not going to try to cross the waterfront, and then use partnerships and frameworks as a way of allowing you to consume this technology without having the downside of choosing best of breed. The advice for you on this one is, the old adage, well, I guess I wasn't around at the time, but in the 80s, it was no one got fired for buying IBM. Now you can replace it with XX or YY. I don't think there's any safe bet. You look at the space covered by these companies, especially in the UC space, there's not enough room for all of them to serve Wall Street happily. There will be some dead fish on the beach or some emaciated fish. And if I knew exactly which one, I would probably be doing a different job right now. We can make a lot of money on the stock market. I don't know, but I do know there isn't a safe bet. So in times of safe bets, what I suggest is you think about the framework story just becomes even stronger. Bet in a framework. Heaven forbid Mitel it becomes the carnage in this. Don't think that's likely, but it did. Well, you swap one virtual machine for another virtual machine, and off you go. Right? So I'm not saying there'll be zero impact, there'll be less, but the argument of wouldn't it be better if you buy everything from me, I think is actually couldn't be farther from the truth in the way the market is right now. So I'll wrap it up with one more mountain picture. This one I also took. Anyone know which, we looked at some ice fields just south of the Arctic Circle, and this one is equatorial, so right around the equator. Anyone know where this is? Any guesses? Not a lot of mountaineers in the crowd. That's Kilimanjaro. So Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain and the only mountain in Africa that has snow all year round. And it's a little bit distorted on this picture, but it's better on yours. You can see on the back of the mountain there's a teeny little cloud. You see it? It's a little, and that's caused by the mountain. And this is really early in the morning. This is about 2 days before summiting. So I don't know, 15,000 feet here. It's 20,000 at the top. And this is about 5 in the morning. That cloud is just starting. And it's caused by the warm air coming off the Indian Ocean getting pushed up. And then it creates a little cloud on the back. And as the day goes on, that cloud gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time, i.e. like on the day we summited, when you get to the top, sometimes the whole west of the mountain is a sea of cloud, and you're above it. You're like this little island on the top caused by this mountain. And that rain seeding that comes from that mountain actually makes a whole area of East Africa fertile. So people can live and you can farm and do a whole series of things. And I think that's kind of where we are in cloud in our industry. We're at the really early days of getting that little swirl off the back of the mountain. But it is going to really nourish the industry as a whole, and it's going to change things, and it's going to make some very interesting farming for all of us going forward. Thanks very much for your time.